The Covid-19 pandemic has forced learning settings to adapt to new ways of teaching and learning. With many schools back in full swing, social distancing becoming a new normal and human interaction limited. Some schools have sourced innovative ways to create learning spaces that induce an encouraging learning environment while still adhering to social distancing. To speak more about this, I'm joined by Lorna Jackson, a Zimbabwean school teacher, and ironically, whilst having been in the profession for over 40 years, is amongst the first to explore breaking boundaries and learning spaces. And Landi, Blok van Cronesteyn, a teacher, remedial therapist and educational psychologist here in Johannesburg. Good morning to you both. Thank you for joining us. Lorna, let me start with you. Structure has long been the standard for learning spaces, and successfully too. Is that still the preferred method of teaching?
Good morning, Hugo. Thank you for having me. You know what? There's structure and there's structure. I think children all need structure because it helps them to feel secure and safe. But because of the times that we find ourselves in, I think teachers worldwide have had to adapt, as you said previously. And I think as we learn to move with the times and understand that all the learners in our classrooms are different, they're individuals, and we cannot expect them all to respond or to behave the same way, no matter what we do in our classrooms.
That's pretty interesting, and I suppose, Landi, it speaks to the ability or capacity of teachers to create multiple spaces or multiple methods of teaching students or learners in a single classroom.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Hugo. I think it's sometimes challenging due to class sizes physically and space and so forth. But I completely agree with Lorna that kids don't all learn the same. You can't force a fish to climb a tree when it's not a monkey, for instance. So it is very important to try and meet the kids where they're at and create a space for them where they can learn at their level. Kids will do exceptionally well when they can. So if they are able to, then they will do well. So whether a child needs to be standing while completing their work as opposed to sitting because he really struggles to keep himself seated, then that's an easy adaptation that can be made. Whereas, you know, there are research, and especially outside of our borders, teachers are working towards yoga balls in classes and having even bicycles with a desk attached to it so that kids can move. You know,
that's pretty interesting. Walk us through that, please.
All right, so yeah, I think it's slowly starting to make its way this side, but they basically take a stationary bicycle and attach a desk to it, so the kid can cycle while completing their work. So for those kids that need movement, they get the proprioceptive input, and they can move and then they can concentrate at the same time. Whereas you force a child that needs movement to sit in their chair, that's when they fall off, or they struggle so much to keep themselves seated that they can't concentrate on the work that's being done. So those are quite big adaptations to a classroom, but there's smaller ones, like allowing a child to play with a piece of Play-Doh in his left or right hand, depending on which hand they have, while writing. That sort of gives the brain stimulation at the same time. It also helps a lot for anxiety. So a child that's anxious while playing with a piece of Play-Doh that's not destructive actually helps them focus on the work and being able to give an output.
Now, Lorna, you've been in the business a little over 40 years. Walk us through, well, when I went to school, certainly, it was sit behind a desk, don't fidget, sit still, speak to no one until spoken to, and you got into a lot of trouble if you didn't. Now, you've explored or employing some other methods of teaching your school children, you know, in fact, letting them write while they lie on the floor, for instance.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been having so much fun since we've been allowed back in class, because I realized that, you know, as Landi was saying, children need to move. And as we all grew up, like you just said, we had to sit at desks and not move and talk when we were allowed to talk. But what I'm finding is, if you have that structure, you can have chaos, but order in that chaos. And I think it boils down to teachers knowing their students. And if you've got a child that needs to move, I, for example, have got one of those gym balls that Landi was talking about, and the children that need to move, they can actually sit on the ball And they're moving, and they're so busy concentrating, staying on the ball, that they get their work done. I've also actually got a tent in my classroom, and the children love to crawl into the tent. Others go under a table that I've covered with a tablecloth, and they like that feel of being secure and safe. Others go and lie on beanbags. How they work like that, I don't know, but the work gets done. And the only rule I have is that the work has to be done and done neatly. And being a strong believer in what the Bible says, I really believe that as we train up children in the way that they should go, they respond amazingly well when we give them that structure, but organization in that structure.
Landi, do you get the impression that this is the perfect time to do away with structure, experiment, to do new things, primarily because COVID has given us a new normal? And in many instances, whether it's a workspace for those of us that work and for children in school, that it's an opportunity to experiment and break boundaries, if you will.
Yes, I think COVID hits us quite, everyone quite hard, and it has forced us to adapt and change very quickly as well. So yes, I do think that this is an opportune time to create and to test boundaries and to see what works in your classroom and what doesn't work. I do feel that we should have been moving into this direction before COVID, but yeah, this is the extreme sense that we are in, that we are now sort of forced to look at alternatives. Yes, going outside with social distancing, maybe, where you have a class of 40 plus kids, maybe under a tree when it's not raining, where they can social distance and there's better ventilation and so forth, might be a great learning environment or learning space for the kids. Maybe one can even sit in the tree if that's what they need to do, and if they're still able to concentrate and still able to engage with the class.
And finally, for you both, the same question: the conversations that you've been having with your colleagues in your workspaces around breaking these boundaries and unstructured learnings, how have they been met? Sorry, Landi, if you'd like to go first.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Well, our teachers are very adventurous, and we are obviously seeing a lot of children that have been traumatized by being at home alone for such a long time and having to relearn the social skills of how do you interact with somebody. Some are still operating in fear, so we work with them so that they realize it is okay to talk to somebody. And I think I go back to, you have to know your children. And all our teachers are very much aware of the background that the children come from, so that we can partner with the parents, because the learning starts at home. And the schools really continue what the parents have started at home. So I find that our staff are very on point at knowing their children, having great communication with the parents, and working together as a partnership for the better of the child.
And for you, Landi?
Yeah, for me to add to that, I think teachers have mixed feelings about that. I do think in the South African environment, specifically in the schools where there are vast numbers in classes, it is really difficult to adapt and to have these different teaching modalities or teaching structures for the children. I think it must be immensely difficult for a teacher that has 50 children in their class, one on a ball, one on a bike, one in a tree, kind of thing. But I do think, so I think that's the biggest challenge for teachers, is the number of kids in the class, and then to get to know each child well enough in order to know what is needed for this child. And then I think management of that with 50 children can be quite difficult. Whereas I think the smaller classes, it's easier to do it, but I do think that teachers are open and willing. I do think the support might be lacking, or the resources might be lacking for them to really explore and to go further into ideas of how they could adapt their classroom seating arrangements, for instance.
Ladies, much appreciated. Thank you for your time this morning. Lorna Jackson, a school teacher, and Landi Blok van Cronesteyn, an educational psychologist, speaking to us this morning about the new learning environment, learning spaces for school children.